Good late afternoon. I see many of you have braved Austin's early evening traffic to join us for this evening's presentation of the Global Issues Speaker Series sponsored by ACC International Programs. I'm William Hayden, the Director of International Programs here at Austin Community College. Tonight's subject, Puerto Rico in Crisis, is one that is near and dear to Professor Samuel Echeverria Cruz, who's going to be our presenter this evening. One housekeeping note, for those students who are here and are receiving extra credit, I have slips that I can pass out at the end of a presentation. So please welcome Professor Echeverria Cruz, and we will get underway.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, everyone hear me? Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. It's such a pleasure to see everyone here this evening, this afternoon. Thank you again for braving the traffic, and I hope that both the material you'll hear tonight and the conversation that I hope we do have will be worth many, many trips of traffic for you. It is a joy to be able to be here and give you some information, give you some food for thought as to what is a critical issue, and that is this tiny island 100 miles across that is suffering right now. And so that is my plan today. Before we started, we showed a little video of Puerto Rico. Island paradise, is it not? Who here has been to Puerto Rico? Wonderful. Wonderful. Who here is of Puerto Rican descent? Wonderful. Welcome. Thank you. Fantastic. Well, I have the distinct honor and privilege of bringing this presentation. You're going to hear a lot of historical information that I hope helps to give us an understanding of why Puerto Rico is what it is, where is it today in the political and economic system, as well as social and cultural changes over time, and more importantly, the discussion of where will it be tomorrow. And I think that's what we need to all come to an agreement on, because I'll give you the end of the story. Puerto Rico cannot stay the way it has been for over 100 years. It just cannot. It needs to grow and move past its this last century of its relationship to the United States. So full disclosure, I am only half Puerto Rican, right? I'm half Mexican. So those of you who know anything about those two cultures, I have internal conflict in myself, and it's wonderful. It gives me an interesting perspective. Puerto Rican and Mexican cultures have come together in many ways, and then sometimes there's conflict in them, but more often than not, there is solidarity. I just remember one quote my uncle in Harlem said, "All these Mexicans are moving in here, they're like cockroaches." And I said, "Uncle," and he looked at me and he said, "Well, it's true." Right? So Puerto Ricans can be very blunt, they can be very passionate and so forth, but what I hope you hear tonight is that they're an incredibly important a part of the fabric of U.S. society, and this is an important topic. There is the Puerto Rican flag. The flag is an interesting symbol for Puerto Rico. This flag, the original design of this flag, was created in 1895 by 59 Puerto Rican exiles in New York City who are part of the Cuban Revolutionary Committee. So in 1895, there are a lot of changes happening between Spain and the New World. The United States is increasing its power and influence, of course. And I always find the flag an important story because at its beginning, this flag was outlawed in Puerto Rico until 1952. This flag was outlawed by the Spanish from until 1898, and by the United States from 1898 until 1952. And then it was accepted as the official flag of Puerto Rico. But it is a flag based on the Cuban flag. The Cuban flag colors are inverted, but it is a flag of protest. It is a flag born out of conflict. And that sums up a lot of Puerto Rican history, especially in its relationship to the United States. The flag is special to me, of course. My grandmother came from Ponce in the southern part of the island to New York City in 1939. My grandfather And my father and his siblings, my aunt and uncle, came in 1947, 1948. And then my great-grandparents came to New York in 1960. So the story of Puerto Rico is a story of many of our families that have not migrated, but relocated. And that's going to be an important distinction, as you'll see. But what I hope to do is bring in some of my own journeys, both in New York City, in Puerto Rico, in Texas, growing up also in Brownsville and in northern Mexico, to have some perspective here. So always good to start with a map. I like colors, so there are some colorful maps. There you see Puerto Rico in reference to the Greater and Lesser Antilles, Central and South America, and of course Florida and Cuba. So as you can see, Puerto Rico is smallish relative to some of the more major island chains there, but I want to make sure we're all clear on geographically where we are in this area of the Caribbean. Again, here's a map of Puerto Rico. The two major centers in the northeast, San Juan, and in the south, Ponce. And at the time of the United States acquisition of Puerto Rico, those two cities were roughly the same size and of same importance in many ways. So there's a beautiful island. It's not very big. In the center are mountainous regions and, of course, coastal areas, beautiful beaches. They will take your money, tourism money. So Puerto Rico has been in the news lately. Puerto Rico passes an emergency law regulating $70 billion debt. It's not good when the island is referred to as Greece-like lows. There's a crisis in trash collection. There's a healthcare crisis. There's an education crisis. There's a migration or relocation crisis, as Congress fears a mass exodus from the island. One report, which I think is very indicative, Puerto Ricans will pass Cubans in Florida by 2020. You know, South Florida is the home of the a large Cuban enclave that helped develop South Florida after 1959. But for Puerto Ricans to start to dominate Florida politics and Florida social, cultural life is a very important growth. And we will continue and finish talking about the quest for statehood as there's a referendum in June, another referendum to decide or to discuss statehood. This referendum will be held on June 11th, 2017, and I want to be clear here. This first referendum, this first vote will include two options. Let's remember that, two options: statehood or independent/free association. If a majority chooses the latter, then they'll have a second referendum in October. So if the majority of Puerto Ricans on the island choose independence or free association, then they will have another vote in October. So that's just something to remember as we move forward through this process. So demographics and politics, okay? There are 3,500 square miles. So Puerto Rico is larger than Delaware and Rhode Island. So it's in the realm of what we would consider size-wise, similar to our smallest states. There are 3.4 million Puerto Ricans living on the island as of 2013. That is greater than 21 other states. So Puerto Rico has a population that puts it almost near the middle of the states. There are 5.4 million Puerto Ricans living in the United States. So this is a large population that has been here for a long time. The second largest Hispanic subgroup, 10% of all U.S. Hispanics, but if you include the island population, that will jump to 15%. So roughly 1 in 8 Hispanics, those who call themselves Hispanics on the census, may be Puerto Rican. Other important political points: Puerto Ricans have been U.S. citizens since 1917. And I'm still surprised that questions that come up even to this day that state are, when did you get your citizenship? And it's something we need to be clear about. Puerto Ricans are citizens, and that's the core issue and challenge. We're going to talk about how citizens of this country have been treated for 100+ years. They may not vote in federal elections. They're represented by a resident commissioner in Congress, in the House of Representatives, who speaks but never gets to vote on legislation on the floor. They're exempt from federal income tax, but they pay all local, island, and other federal taxes. They're excluded from Social Security supplements, and there's a lower Medicaid reimbursement cap than states. This is important because many arguments focus on the, quote, welfare system in Puerto Rico, but it is not the same system, and it is not nearly as robust as all the 50 states have. And so that's also a reminder of some of the issues. How did we get here? Before 1898, this island, before Columbus's arrival, this island was called Boriquen or Borinquen, inhabited by the Taíno native peoples. Columbus arrives on November 19th, 1493, changing the world in that process. So for 400 years of Spanish rule, you had this mix, this mezcla of Spanish, native, and African populations and culture. And Puerto Rico gets swept up, as all Latin American societies do, in the independence movements of Simón Bolívar and others to start thinking about new ways of existing as political entities. At this time, before we get to 1898, there's already increasing unrest between Spain and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is far from Spain, so it's an island that is distant, both geography, but also wanting and wishing for more autonomy. And if you know anything about Spanish history, this is swinging from conservative to liberal governments to monarchy in the Spanish crown and in the Spanish political system. Sometimes Puerto Rico benefits and sometimes it gets hurt. And towards the end of the 1800s, Puerto Ricans are already preparing for a new world. There's labor unrest, there's economic and political isolation, and then there's also the United States of America, which is not sitting idly by, but has been heavily involved in Latin America since the Monroe Doctrine, and now moving forward into Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, is aggressively looking at a new world that the 20th century will dawn, where the United States will have hegemony, will have political, social power over this continent. And so Puerto Rico gets mentioned often in the late 1800s as a strategic asset along with Cuba and Hawaii. So little Puerto Rico is always in the minds of the President of the United States, the Congress, and many in the cabinet. Sensing these challenges, sensing these difficulties, and in a liberal swing in the Spanish government, in 1897, the Spanish government approves limited self-government for the island. And in 1898, the United States declares war on Spain. So it's too little, too late for Spain to recapture its political connection with the island. Ooh. What happened in 1898 is the Spanish-American War. By this time, President Benjamin Harris, Secretary of State James Blaine, and Teddy Roosevelt had all been discussing through these periods the importance of Puerto Rico in a new post-Spanish rule world. So on May 12, 1898, there was a 19-day war between the United States and Spain. And a Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1898. 5 U.S. soldiers and 17 Spanish soldiers died in this war. And as I wrote there, Ambassador John Hay wrote, it was a splendid little war, a splendid little war. Why? Because after this war, the United States takes control of Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Cuba, which quickly they recognized the need to release Cuba to independence, put Cuba on a path to independence. It's better as an ally, as a country, because of its size especially. But was this a violent takeover? No. The Puerto Rican community was already ready to rid itself of Spanish political power, and it was ready, most argue, to take on a relationship to the United States. the labor groups that had become an important part of Puerto Rican history were ready to join the American market system. They were ready to move past kind of the old colonial agricultural system. Sugar, coffee, and tobacco are important exports. And you can be assured that there were competing interests in the United States. Sugar producers as well as sugar refiners. The sugar refineries loved the idea of Puerto Rico being part of the United States because they could get cheap sugar into the United States. The tobacco growers in the United States did not want Puerto Rican tobacco to flood the market. So there was this tension, economic tension, social tension. Most Puerto Ricans thought that if they were able to get to be part of the United States, they would experience economic reforms, social reforms, increased education, and so forth and so on. But as soon as 1898 happens, there's a large separatist movement that develops. These are Puerto Ricans who say, no, the only way that we're going to be who we need to be is to be separate from the United States. And so begins an important debate in the United States, in the island of Cuba, as well as in other places. And if you know you're part of the history here, here's this famous debate between Mark Twain and imperialism and Rudyard Kipling and the white man's burden to care for the colored peoples of the world. And so this plays out in Puerto Rico as well. And 1898 comes and goes and leads to the Foraker Act, signed April 12, 1900, also known as the Organic Act. This is an extremely important piece of legislation because it creates the first relationship, the first political relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. It offers a limited civilian government. It puts the island under federal law. But more importantly, it starts its understanding of the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States with tariffs, putting extra taxes on goods from Puerto Rico to the United States in order that the domestic United States market would be more competitive. And this is important because this, in the Constitution, is not allowed for states to do this to each other. States cannot slap tariffs on each other. So we call that the Uniformity Clause. States in the United States of America are not little countries. They don't operate like that. But Puerto Rico was treated not as a state from the beginning. It was something different, something else. And I just want to be clear on that. All of the limited civilian government, especially the governor, was appointed by the president of the United States. So this is a very limited civilian government, still run by officials from the United States. No Puerto Ricans ran Puerto Rico until the 1950s. There's also another aspect here to the incorporation of Puerto Rico, and that is racial issues. Jim Crow is a reality that shapes a lot of political decisions and political discussions. And there were many in the South of the United States that weren't comfortable or had a difficult understanding of how Puerto Rico would ever be incorporated since it's not of a Northern European background. So there's this increasing tension and pushback between different stakeholders, between businesses, between politicians from the North and the South, between Puerto Ricans themselves within the island, and many who had already left for other places, New York City, Cuba. So there's a lot going on here. And this leads to the first most important series of Supreme Court cases that steps in and says, okay, this is what Puerto Rico is going to be. These are called in legal terms the insular cases. A bunch of cases that define the political system and the political relationship between islands that were captured after the Spanish-American War and the United States. And what's important here is Supreme Court Justice Fuller decides that Puerto Rico is not a state, obviously, and also is not what he called a non-incorporated territory. He creates this incorporated versus non-incorporated territory scheme, and Puerto Rico is non-incorporated, which means it doesn't have full rights. It does not have the full power of protections that the federal law affords if it were incorporated. This is kind of made up out of thin air. And one of the famous phrases, Puerto Rico is foreign to the United States in a domestic sense. That's what lawyers do. They make up phrases that don't have any real meaning, but they do have massive meaning. Foreign to the United States in a domestic sense. That defines Puerto Rico today. Foreign to the United States in a domestic sense. You are and you are not part of us. You are betwixt and between. And much of Puerto Rico's history is this constant dialogue with itself. How do we become more than we are without having to leave our island and be a part of the mainland? And this is important steps in these processes. The next steps are the Jones-Shafroth Act of 1917. This is the act that affords and accords Puerto Ricans born after April 25th, 1898 with citizenship, U.S. citizenship. It expands self-rule, and it sets one of the first important financial landmarks. Bonds, municipal bonds, are triple exempt in Puerto Rico. They're exempt for local, state, and federal taxes. That means when the island borrows money and issues a bond, that bond, if you make money on the interest on that bond, it's not taxed. It was a way to get investment into Puerto Rico from day one, but it had its problems. Some see this Jones Act 1917, you know, what's there is World War I. As soon as the Jones Act is passed, forced conscription happens of 18,000 Puerto Rican men to join the war effort, and they do join. And so some have argued that there was pressure in the United States to bring as many other troops into the fray of the Great War as possible. Also, Puerto Rico they step up the game, so to speak, in dealing with Puerto Rico because the Panama Canal needs a place where Puerto Rico is a strategic defense for the Panama Canal. So it becomes important again in the president and the government's eyes. Sugar, tobacco, and coffee are become extremely important agents moving in quickly to take over, to disrupt, to enhance each of these markets. Sugar dominates, tobacco dominates, coffee eventually goes away and makes a comeback later in the century for a variety of economic reasons. Here's where you have an increasing inter-political parties in this time in the 20s. What do we do? What Puerto Ricans are starting to say, this American deal isn't as good as we thought it was going to be. We seem to be put in this weird position, and we're suffering in some ways. But with citizenship comes free access and free location or ease of relocation. So here begins in the early 1920s the migration stream into New York City and Chicago. Those are the two places that most Puerto Ricans migrate to in the early 20s. Next comes the Great Depression, and with the worldwide sugar crisis, you have the depression that Puerto Rico sets in. Right? Puerto Rico has been linked to worldwide markets since its incorporation into the United States and global capitalism. So worldwide sugar crisis, depression hits, per capita income falls precipitously between 1930 and 1933. And then you have the rule of Governor Blanton Winship. 5 years of a militarized police and 2 large massacres, one in Rio Piedra and one in Ponce. And the Ponce massacre was the worst. It took place on Palm Sunday, 21 March 1937 in Ponce. A peaceful civilian march turned into a police shooting in which 19 civilians and 2 policemen were killed and more than 200 others wounded. Most of the dead were reportedly shot in their backs. The march had been organized by the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party to commemorate the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico by the governing Spanish National Assembly in 1873 and to protest the U.S. government's imprisonment of the party's leader, Pedro Albizu Campos, on sedition charges. So this is not a good time. Puerto Rico feels the brunt of force by a president and a government that allows this to happen for 5 years until FDR pulls Blanton Winship, says, this is too much chaos. I'm not sure what you're doing down there, but it's not good. In a response to the Depression, of course, we know New Deal legislation happens that transforms the U.S. economy. Same thing happens in Puerto Rico. The Sugar Act of 1934, along with what's called Plan Muñoz Marin and Plan Chardon. These are two men who are leaders in Puerto Rico. And they devise a plan that FDR approves that says, hey, let's redo the sugar industry here. Let's take land and let's reduce production so that we can have a quota system so that we can industrialize a little bit. And it was somewhat of an effective plan. Also, the Puerto Rican Reconstruction Administration was set up, and so there were many civil works that were done, just like there were in the United States. And here we have the growth of the Partido Nacionalista, the Albizu Campos, and the National Party, which at some point used violence in order to bring attention to the cause of Puerto Rican independence. In the 40s and 50s and 60s, we have many conflicts and also much progress. I'd like to mention the 65th Infantry Regiment, the Borinqueños. This was a Puerto Rican-only regiment that was created in World War I that only Puerto Ricans on the island were conscripted into. And they fought in World War I, they fought in World War II, and they fought in Korea. They're one of the most decorated units. I could talk a lot about Puerto Ricans in America and what a good thing. We have a Supreme Court justice who's Puerto Rican. I could talk all day about that, but in order to not use that time, in order to get more information, I just want to mention these are men that bled and died for this country, and they did it extremely heroically, especially in Korea. Go and read what these men did. One Medal of Honor winner allowed a Marine group to escape and stayed there overnight, shooting at a Chinese line of soldiers by himself for 16 hours. And it was, when the smoke cleared, there were, as I read the account, there were dozens of Chinese soldiers 10 feet away from him. Right? He basically kept a whole Chinese line offensive by himself at bay so that the Marines could escape. So these are men who did incredible things. My great-grandfather served in World War I. My grandfather served in World War II. My uncle, the Marine, served in Korea. My father, the Air Force, and multiple other uncles all served. And so this is a reminder that whatever Puerto Rico has or does not have, one thing it does show is that it wants to be a part of this country. It will make the supreme sacrifice. I just wanted to mention that because it's a source of pride in my family, except when it's not. My grandfather served in the World War II in Europe. He hated when he had to fly the American flag with the Puerto Rican flag. He absolutely hated it. He said, why do I have to fly the American flag? I'm a Puerto Rican. Right? Now, he was independence-minded. He never understood why Puerto Rico wanted to be anything other than its own country. But he served. He served and fought. And so this was an important reminder that with the conflict of World War II in Korea, come opportunities for Puerto Ricans to show that they are ready, able, and willing to be a part of American society. Important political changes. In 1947, Puerto Ricans get to elect their governor for the first time. And that's an important break. And yet, in response to independence movements in 1948, there's a gag law placed on Puerto Rico by Congress. You may not sing the Puerto Rican anthem, you may not fly the Puerto Rican flag, and if you discuss anything about independence, you will be put in prison. So much for the First Amendment. In 1950, the Puerto Rico Federal Relations Act creates what we now have, the Commonwealth status of Puerto Rico. Every law that dictates what Puerto Ricans how Puerto Ricans are incorporated or not, the island into American political life is based in this 1950 law. So it's an important law. It was signed into law by President Harry Truman. So for the first time, Puerto Ricans can organize their local government. They can create their own constitution. And so that's an important step that defines their relationship for Puerto Rico and the United States. But in 1950, there was also an assassination attempt on President Harry Truman in Washington, D.C. by two Puerto Rican nationalists. Both were killed in the shootout, but it was a reminder of how tense and how passionate and the struggle was, and how convinced many Puerto Ricans were that this was not going to end well for Puerto Rico. It hadn't gone well up until this point. It wouldn't end well after. But in the 1950s and 60s comes Operation Bootstrap. This transforms the island in a series of projects from an agricultural to an industrial one. The government of the United States, along with what's called the Puerto Rico Industrial Development Company, set forth a series of economic changes, a series of economic projects that then create a new economy. So here as a graph here, in the blue, we have agricultural jobs, and in the green, we have industrial jobs. So as you can see, agricultural jobs dropped precipitously from the 1940s to the 1970s, and industrial jobs increased. But you do see something interesting there. More agricultural jobs were lost than industrial jobs were gained. You see that? What happens when you lose more jobs than you make? Does that make people happy? No. I think this November election shows that. When people don't have the work they think they can have or did have, it causes a lot of frustration. And with that, with the Operation Bootstrap, there was a lot of criticism because unemployment skyrocketed. Why? Because agriculture, as low wage as it was, agriculture is labor intensive. But industrial jobs don't require as much labor. So what happens in the 1950s and 60s is the mass exodus of Puerto Ricans on the island to now New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, places in the Midwest, Chicago as well, and Florida. And so this is an important reminder of these economic situations that increase migration. And last but not least are civil rights. It is in the 1960s that, of course, Puerto Rican civil rights movements are increased precipitously, especially in New York City, but also on the island that say, what are we? Do we or do we not have full rights as citizens? We fight for this country, we die for this country, we migrate back and forth and work in the United States and work on the island. Where are the rights coming from? The rights for women and so forth. 1970s to today, basically, the United States government does a lot of things to tweak, to help, quote unquote, but really just to control the island of Puerto Rico. The first one is the IRS tax code of 1976 change. This allows companies that have jobs, that have operations in Puerto Rico, don't pay taxes on the profits that come from those factories. And so Big Pharma invades Puerto Rico, right? Over 80 big pharma factories are set up by the 1980s in Puerto Rico. And then one of the most curious pieces of information. Up until 1984, Puerto Rico could declare bankruptcy in Chapter 9, which means if I owe you money, if Puerto Rico owes me money, they can declare bankruptcy, and they have a right by federal law to stop this process, and let's negotiate our debt. Let's give us time. But in 1984, in the bankruptcy law changes, in the definition section of the law, somebody included this sentence. State includes the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, except for the purpose of defining who may be a debtor under Chapter 9 of this title. And nobody knows who put that sentence in the law. There is no congressional record as to whom. Some say it was Strom Thurmond, Senator Strom Thurmond, a long-serving 40-plus-year senator from South Carolina. Nobody knows. It's a mystery. So, with that, fast forward to today, Chapter 9 is something that is not available to Puerto Rico because of this sentence. But before 1984, it was. With the 60s and 70s come statehood plebiscites. Will Puerto Rico become a state? So we have 1967, 39% say, yes, we would like to be a state. In 1993, it's 46%. None of these votes count unless it's a majority. In 1998, it's 46.5%. But for the first time, they add the category none of the above. Those of you who do taking sociology with me, you know that surveys, you can use surveys and you can use questions on ballots to influence the outcome. And the categories become important. And 1998 is a great example. If you take out, and I think it was 2012, you had another controversy. The first ballot in 2012 said, do you want to be a state or do you want to remain things as they are? Statehood got 60-something%. But they didn't count the ballots that were not put anything. They were empty. The federal government said you have to count those ballots. And if you count those ballots, they're empty. The people submitted an empty ballot. It jumped down to less than 50%. So there's a controversy in the 2012 plebiscite. And then we get to the 2017 plebiscite, which I'll talk a little bit more here in a minute. But this HR 5174 is one of the problems that the Congress is dealing with today. The Puerto Rican economy today, President Clinton repealed Section 936. Here you have a graph of the GDP of Puerto Rico, GDP annual growth from 2000 to 2013. As you can see, in 1996, President Clinton signed into law the repeal of Section 936, which would mean that you no longer are tax-free profits if your company's in Puerto Rico, and it would expire in 2006. So he gave 10 years. Well, as you can see, as 2006 approaches, people are leaving Puerto Rico, the companies are leaving, the factories are leaving, and the growth of the country, economic growth, is becoming negative, as we see there. So that's important. In order to deal with this problem, Puerto Rico passed the what's called Act 20 and 22 in 2012. This first law gave hedge fund managers a flat 4% tax rate as an incentive to move operations. And the second one offered investors complete tax exemptions on dividends, interest, and capital gains, provided the investor lived on the island for half the year. Like many countries that are less developed, the only way that people seem to think that you can make money is to bring money in, not to actually develop the country itself. Puerto Rico is no different. The only way to survive for 100 years is to bring as much money in, but when that money leaves, Puerto Rico has nothing to fall back. It has no industry. It has no development problem. Next are vulture funds. What are vulture funds? If I know your economy is bad, I'm going to buy your bonds, and then when you go bankrupt, I'm going to buy them for a penny, even though they're worth $1, and I'll get 50 cents when we go negotiation for bankruptcy. So these are called vulture funds. They're buying this bad debt, knowing that they're going to end up hurting the country, or in this case, Puerto Rico later. And a lot of these vulture funds invest in places like Greece, Argentina, Detroit. And they have, many of these funds have bonds, debt from Puerto Rico, Greece, and Argentina all in one. So these really are people who are looking for you to fail as quickly as possible so they can make money on the back end. So that's been a problem. Of course, Puerto Rico, like any good addict, got addicted to debt. Anybody here have a credit card? It's easy to get addicted to debt. It's easy to charge and not think about that money problem later. Well, Puerto Rico had corruption and mismanagement. It is also to blame for its problem. The government itself thought, we'll just make it up later. We'll push this problem down the road. We'll keep borrowing this money. We'll keep getting into debt. It'll be fine. But we keep depending on foreign investment. We've created a massive public sector. We know this is a problem in the United States. You have a massive public sector with pensions. Where does your money have to go as your economy shrinks? More and more of your money goes to those pensions. Those people have earned that retirement, but it's a problem because you have less and less money to make other things work in the economy. And then, of course, Puerto Rico was hit with austerity measures. Cut, slash, teachers, schools, hospitals were shut down, or electricity was shut down half the day in the hospital. This is what's happening today in the Puerto Rican economy. So I'm going to switch here to a short video on Puerto Rican life.
Here is a staggering statistic. 56% of children living in the U.S. Commonwealth of Puerto Rico live in poverty. That's compared to 22% of children for the entire United States. CCTV's Nita Soledad Perez is in Puerto Rico with more.
Behind the island's enchantment, there is a hidden truth. Puerto Rico's children are the poorest of the United States. More than half of Puerto Rican children are living in families whose income is less than $20,000. In U.S. terms, below the poverty line. Families like Ana Milagros. She has 4 kids and works 5 hours a day. Ana Milagros has been working at a nursing home for 9 months, but she only gets 5 hours a day for minimum wage.
Yo cobro un viernes sí, un viernes no.
You get paid every other Friday, so if I want to buy clothing for one of my children, I have to save a little for 1 week. I can't afford everything at the same time.
Though money is not enough for Ana and her children, poverty cannot be simply defined by a family's income.
83% of children are living in communities with high poverty. And this means that these children and their families do not have enough resources at home or at the community.
The community of the Martín Peña Canal, where Ana lives, is home to the faces behind the numbers. One of the most worrying issues here is public health.
There is no sewage system in the canal, and that is our top priority right now, because on rainy days, water flows into the canal, forcing wastewater back into pipes and causing floods that sometimes reach inside these family homes.
And the other skeleton in this community's closet is crime.
Every time there is a shooting, my 10-year-old gets really nervous. We all hide in the bathroom of the house because it's the only part built in cement.
But not everything is lost. There's hope, smiles, and perseverance. In this canal community, there are over 80 leaders working to improve the lives of its residents and children. And they say they will do it with or without the government's help. Nita Soledad Perez, CCTV, San Juan, Puerto Rico.
So as you can see, these are how U.S. citizens are living right now in Puerto Rico. When it comes to education, I'm an educator. I'm interested in what students are going through in the island of Puerto Rico. And so here are some important statistics from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This is the largest nationally representative assessment of America's students, what they know and what they can do in various subject areas. And here you see this is the number of students who are at or above basic. And if you're to the left of that line, you're below basic. And as you can see, 94% of students are below basic. The national average is 30. And so this island is not able to educate its children as they should be educated. And these are the challenges we have to deal with. You see how different Puerto Rico is. This is for proficiency, which is a higher score in mathematics at grade 4 and at grade 8. And as you can see, the national average is 39% of students. The nation, or the public, NP, PR has a pound sign, or I guess hashtag, as you young people call it. And I said, what is a hashtag? It says it rounds to 0. 0% of students are proficient in math at 4th and 8th grade, according to this test. So these are incredibly heartbreaking, but at the same time, Puerto Rican students also know the situation and they want to be a part of the solution.
We are pretty sure you are all updated on about what is happening currently with Puerto Rico's education system, especially here in the University of Puerto Rico.
It's all over the news. Online articles, newspapers, banners. It's everywhere. But here are the facts. A fiscal control board has been placed upon the government of Puerto Rico by the Promesa Bill. And they have the authority over the Puerto Rican Constitution and the governor. Their purpose, according to the United States government, is to reconstructure our debt. This process includes federal budget cuts to the funding of the University of Puerto Rico, starting at $300 million, but now $450 million.
These cuts have harsh effects on our university, such as an increase on the price of tuition and fees, and a reduction of scholarships, classes, and professors. Clearly, there have been negative reactions to this, leading to protests and demonstrations. The media has a peculiar way of representing us university students, so we thought it's important to show the real opinions and feelings of those who will be affected by this, the students, the professors, and the employees.
We are going to...
There's an example of college students at the University of Puerto Rico trying to create information and knowledge about this situation. So, what has the U.S. government done to fix this bad situation? Here's where we are today. In 2014, because Puerto Rico cannot declare Chapter 9 bankruptcy, the Puerto Rican government said, okay, we're going to pass a law that says we're going to, Debt and Recovery Act, we're going to negotiate our debts. We cannot make these payments. It's crushing our economy. We're going to stop, and we're going to talk to the people we owe money to, and we're going to work this out. It sounds like a good idea, right? I mean, if you owe me money and you want to talk about it, that's fine. But the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. And this is part of two cases that really shook the Puerto Rican people. The Supreme Court rejected this law that especially wanted the public utilities to restructure $20 billion in debt. And Justice Clarence Thomas, in a 5-2 majority, said this 2014 law was at odds with the federal bankruptcy code, which bars states and lower units of government from enacting their own versions of bankruptcy law, but Puerto Rico can't declare bankruptcy. So you're a state. States can't create new bankruptcy laws, but Puerto Rico can't file for bankruptcy. Isn't that a little unfair? Okay, just me. Puerto Rico is a state, apparently, except when it comes to Chapter 9. What are we? What is Puerto Rico? It is a state, it's not a state. No, it's not a state, of course, but it is a state in some ways, but of course it's not. Another case in June of 2016 as well, Puerto Rico Sanchez Valle. This one was even more surprising. This involved a criminal who had been, if I remember correctly, this case, federal crime was committed in Puerto Rico, and this criminal was tried and was found not guilty. But Puerto Rico said, well, we also have a state law, the same law we want to charge this person with. Now, you can do that if you're a state. A state can charge you with murder, and the federal government can charge you. Depends on the crime. But the Supreme Court ruled, wait a minute, Puerto Rico, you're not a state. And the Solicitor General, Donald Verrilli, argued that while Puerto Rico has some level of self-governance and its legislature has the power to pass several laws, the island is still a territory subject to Congress. The nation's highest court concluded that although the island may have its own constitution, its own government, its own laws, and its own courts, it is not a true sovereign under the Fifth Amendment's double jeopardy clause. To that end, as the time was getting near and Puerto Rico was not going to be able to make its quarterly, actually every 6 months it has a huge payment to make, the United States government in July of 2016 set up the Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Stability Act, which, as you just heard these students say, the president appoints a board, the Congress of Puerto Rico selects from a list also of people on this board, and they are going to help Puerto Rico turn around its economy. But this law treats Puerto Rico as neither a state nor a municipality. And with that, it can overrule the Puerto Rican government. It can overrule the Puerto Rican lawmakers. It can overrule the Constitution of Puerto Rico in order to deal with this debt problem. That upset a lot of Puerto Ricans. Once again, in 2016, beginning in 1901, Puerto Rico is not really who it thinks it is. It is not really part of this country. It just isn't. Some have argued this is a colonial and anti-democratic rule that has been approved. So, here we are. We have debt. We're like Greece. there's a crisis. There's a crisis. There's a crisis. Relocation. But the new governor of Puerto Rico ran and was elected governor on one platform. I will bring a referendum to make Puerto Rico a state. We are going to be a state. This is it. It's over. It's done. We've got to change this. And he set a referendum for June 11th, 2017. And on that piece of paper, it's going to say two things. Are you going to be a state, or are you going to be an independent or free association? This is what we started this talk with, one of these ideas. Except something happened. 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice told the governor, you must add a third option to the vote. Stay the same. And if you don't add a third option, we will not give you the $2.5 million it costs to run the election. We're right back where we started. You know, the people, the voice of Puerto Ricans will not be heard. They elected this governor overwhelmingly because they said, we're done with this. We're either going to be a country or a state. It has to end. And the Department of Justice under Trump said, no, let's keep it going. Let's make sure we're all clear on this. Well, Governor Rosselló tweeted that he still plans to hold a referendum on June 11th with the original ballot. We'll see what the Trump administration does to this effect. What does the future hold? Ramon Grosfoguel writes, there are 4 options for Puerto Rico. You can blindly support a neo-colonial republic which would allow the local and transnational bourgeoisie to better compete while pauperizing Puerto Rican workers. Basically, just make Puerto Rico poor. And whatever we can extract wealth from it, we'll keep doing that. Number 2, you can support the present status, which is still going to reduce federal funds that benefit the island. Right? For example, Medicare is capped in Puerto Rico at 60% of what it's capped in the States. So even though Puerto Ricans get Medicare, the reimbursement is far less for doctors in Puerto Rico. Well, guess what? All the doctors are leaving. So, and as you heard, the majority of Puerto Ricans are living below the poverty level. So that Medicare access and Medicaid access is critical. Number 3, you can become a statehood, which attempts to make statehood viable by linking it to cuts in federal programs and other attacks on the working poor people. What some people argue, what's going to happen is if you're going to become a state, we're going to crush you first. So you don't have too much power when you become a state. I don't know if you've been following politics, but there's always this idea we can't add a 51st state without adding a 52nd state. So who's that going to be? Is it going to be Washington, D.C. as a state? Is it going to be Guam and so forth and so on? So we have, as a Virgin Islands, we have these, the Congress seems to be stuck in this mentality. And there's what some are calling a 4th option. Resist neoliberal privatizations and cuts in federal transfers. Any decolonization of the island should claim a historic indemnification. Puerto Rico has suffered a long time. You're going to have to do right, United States of America, cut Puerto Rico free, but also help Puerto Rico be successful, which will end up making you successful. A strong Puerto Rico in the Caribbean helps the United States of America. We should radicalize the existing democratic structures, right? So that U.S. citizenship means something. It means that we're going to demand social justice and equality just like we do here. Just like we do here. Or we should more. This is a new type of struggle that attempts to expand Puerto Rican citizen rights. Statehood from a radical democratic perspective. Why do you have this kind of language? Because Puerto Rico is a unique place. It's been basically a colony for over 120 years, basically, of the United States of America. And everyone agrees, the UN agrees, this is not healthy. The UN has been saying since the 1950s, stop at America, but of course, America can continue. And again, these are U.S. citizens. These are U.S. citizens. They're not foreigners. They're U.S. citizens. They're among you. They look like Mexicans. Ooh, that's crazy, I know. I hope this has been informative. I hope that we can continue this discussion. I think now is a great time. Hopefully you have some questions and some discussion points that we can go through that would be fruitful. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the overview and informative presentation.
Thank you.
Let me get my notes. I have them here on my iPhone. Just a couple of clarifications, and you can comment if I'm wrong on this, but the move for independence didn't just pop up in 1898, it was a continuation, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
That's right.
just because I heard it as if it just popped up all of a sudden, but it wasn't the case.
No.
It just continued,
Yeah.
okay. And then in the referendum of 2012, less than 45% of the people voted for statehood, and there was a lot more of the non-voting for statehood.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. The point on Clinton's repealing of 936, he signed the law repealing it, but it was the governor, the right-wing pro-statehood governor, Rosselló, who promoted that so that Puerto Rico would be like other states, but then it sunk the island's economy,
That's right.
leaving to what we are now, what's going on. And then the other thing that you didn't mention, but as a Puerto Riqueño professor in communication, and here because I didn't get jobs in Puerto Rico because of my pro-independence beliefs, the repression of independence has been a major factor for where and why we are and not have other, and including the repression in the media, systematic by the FBI, CIA, Operation COINTELPRO. So there is a limited opportunity to discuss independence in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, very agreed. I should have been more clear, but talking about the assassination attempt on Harry Truman, the independence movement predated 1898, and it's always been, that's why I talked about the gag rule a little bit, to say it was so strong that in 1948, the Congress passed the laws, you can't even talk about independence. You can't even show the flag. You can't even sing the Puerto Rican anthem. We don't want any of that. So, but it's an important reminder, thank you very much, that it hasn't even been a fair discussion, right? And so the independence movement has been very strong throughout this entire century, but it has not been allowed to sink into the consciousness of the people, unfortunately. And American business influence have a lot to do with that.
When I was growing up in Puerto Rico, I was there until I was 23 years old, and I finished the University of Puerto Rico. But one of the things that sometimes people talk was, well, even if the pro-statehood or the PNP wins a plebiscite, it is supremely unlikely that the United States Congress, especially more the Congress than the Senate, would approve giving statehood to Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico would then be the pure official state. Now it's not a state, but it's kind of an official Commonwealth. So the point is, it's a big problem, because even if the PNP won 85% of the, the votes, it's very unlikely that the Congress would approve it, especially the Congress now, a bunch of Republicans.
That's right.
So I don't know what they're doing.
Right.
What's going to happen?
That's a good discussion. Much like gerrymandering here in Texas, Puerto Rico would be a very democratic state in terms of political party, so with a Republican Congress. Obama said publicly once, this has to stop. And he did say he would support the will of the Puerto Rican people. Obama is no longer president. And the Congress has changed and may shift some more. That's a great point. I don't know. This plebiscite in June is non-binding, so it doesn't mean anything. But if it's strong enough, Congress has thought about, especially because of the crisis, maybe we should actually have a serious discussion for the first time, maybe since Eisenhower, about what to do about it. Yeah. Yeah. No. I'm optimistic. Those are all fair. This is a complex issue. None of this is going to be easy, and that's a good reminder that's why Puerto Rico's been in the situation it is. It is not as easy as just becoming independent or becoming a state. But at least let's keep saying something must change. Something must change, and we know that now's the time to keep making this discussion. They've postponed the next debt payment till May 31st, as they're still negotiating right now. So It's April 26th. Promesa did not allow the first restructuring plan that the government put forth. They said, no, we don't like it. You need more cuts, you need more taxes, and we'll see where we are. The governor seems to be doing whatever he can to get to the plebiscite, so he can see, hopefully the people will shout so loudly for statehood that Congress will have to listen. Mm-hmm. Let's get on the microphone. It's for posterity.
So a lot of pro-statehood governors are Republican, and about half of Puerto Ricans vote pro-statehood.
Sort of, yeah.
So then why are we assuming that Puerto Ricans are Democrats? Is it because of their race and ethnicity?
No. I think that the government may be, Republican governors may be, but I think still the Democratic Party influence, especially from the mainland Puerto Rican experience. I'm not sure the Republican Party is going to be as strong as the Republican conservative view in Puerto Rico itself, right? So Puerto Rico, for example, and correct me if I'm wrong, the languages of Puerto Rico are still Spanish and English, the official languages. Right, it's both, right? So
it changes with every administration.
That's true. They try to change it and Puerto Ricans don't. That's right. So Puerto Rico is it'd be an interesting state. I don't think it would follow many of the same patterns, but I don't know that's true. The statement I said is what others have said. Why Republicans in Congress have said, well, Puerto Ricans, they're Hispanic.
Hispanics are Democrats,
exactly.
There you go.
until they're not, right? But I think the bigger issue is Puerto Rico would be a very unique state in that sense. And so that's been a touch point, too, in the independence movement and even the pro-statehood movement. Puerto Ricans are very proud of who they are. They carry themselves as a country.
Just like Texas.
Texas is weird, though, in that sense.
Did you say that about us already?
But I understand that. So in that sense, I can see there's a lot of hesitation because Puerto Ricans have been their own place. Just the fact that Spanish is the official language tells you how unique Puerto Rico is in the sphere of the United States political system. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, we could talk about sports, entertainment, and so forth and so on. So that incorporation, as one famous coach said, those baseball players from Puerto Rico, they didn't swim their way off the island, right? They hit their way off the island, right? So if you heard Roberto Clemente, one of the great humanitarians and Hall of Fame baseball player, and so forth and so on. So like I said, I didn't want to make this into if it's not obvious to you that Puerto Rico has done its fair share to enrich our diversity, our diverse culture. I'd love to talk to you about that, or just go watch Hamilton. Yeah. So, but thank you. It's good points.
Hi, I'm Dr. Taquinedu Maynard. I'm the director of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center
Welcome,
here in
yes.
Austin.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask a question that you may not be able to answer, but if Puerto Rico got independence, can you paint a vision of how we're going to recover? And everybody's welcome to jump in on this one.
Wow. There'd be a lot of good opinions to talk about that. Economically, I don't think it would be a good picture right now, short term, because Operation Bootstrap really hampered any sort of real economic development that Puerto Rico could have had. It's a tourism country. So who are we going to look towards? Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic. It has advantages, of course, because of its long association with the United States. Let's put it this way, and I didn't even talk about this, but statistically, Puerto Ricans are one of the poorest, least healthy groups in the United States in terms of demographic outcomes. I study health among Puerto Ricans and Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans are at the bottom of all the Hispanic groups. And they're one of the near the bottom with Native Americans and Hawaiians in terms of health challenges. I think some of that is because there's a social psychological problem with Puerto Rico maintaining its Commonwealth status. It's just not, there's no clear break as to who and what unless you leave the island and let it go. So that, to me, that's a more important question. For me personally, I don't have a good answer for. I'm optimistic that it'd be better than what it is now in the long term. Because what it is now is getting worse, not better. Yeah. But if others have opinions, by all means. I'm a sociologist, not an economist, so in that sense, I haven't studied too much about the economic challenges of becoming an independent country.
I'm a communication scholar, but have studied political economy and a few other things.
Yes.
And you're right that it would be worse short term under this type of administration.
Sure.
But there are countries around the world that receive more financial foreign aid than Puerto Rico is given, even under the current condition.
Right.
So under a more benign administration in Congress, Puerto Rico could benefit from development funds to create or to sustain its own industries, which have been undermined by the U.S. corporations for decades. Puerto Rico doesn't have a healthy agriculture because it doesn't benefit the southern agricultural sector.
Right.
It doesn't have a fishing industry because it doesn't help the importers.
Right.
If Puerto Ricans were allowed and supported in developing those internal national industries which were undermined by the U.S. corporations, it'd be a different story.
Yeah, I agree. How would you compare and this is the great debate.
And trade with other
and trade.
official terms, not using the merchant marine, which is the most costly, the most expensive of
Yeah.
all.
Well, the microphone's coming.
But I haven't been in Puerto Rico, but I do have family there. I keep in touch with them and the politics. I'll be loud. But one thing on regard to the agriculture, a lot of young people now are starting to build up. This issue is they have the product, but they are not allowed to export. So that's it's like a wall.
Even if we just support the local,
I'm sorry?
even if we produce just for the local people, even if we just support for the local people, that would be enough. Because
Right.
we're importing 90% of our food right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
So if we could produce for ourselves, like we're doing a lot of people in the South Coast, you drive through the South Coast and you can see all the new plantations of plantains, sunflowers, anything, and that's what's not happening. We're importing, 80-90% of the food right now in Puerto Rico. We just have to stimulate the local agriculture so we can be self-sufficient or almost self-sufficient in food production.
Yeah.
And consumption by the tourism industry and the Walmarts and all the others to not bring it from the U.S., but buy the local products that are made there, it'd be a different story. You go to any hotel in Puerto Rico, you'll get watermelon, but you won't get mangoes. Yeah. You'll get pineapple from Hawaii, but not the pineapple, la piña from Puerto Rico. And you ask for the orange juice from Puerto Rico, which is, I have to say so, it's the best orange juice that you can drink. No, it's the Florida orange juice from concentrate. I mean, if those little things were added up, it'd be a different story for Puerto Rico.
I think the great debate there would be, how do we look at Latin America post-colonialism, right? The standard of living in Latin America has gone up, but then others argue neoliberal policies still keep Latin America undeveloped. I do agree. I would like to have the opportunities. Huh? So I would like to, all things being equal, I think independence would eventually bring a higher standard of living, even with the challenges that small Latin American countries have. Although I think Puerto Rico would have a unique situation because, like Mexico, no matter what is happening politically, Mexico and the United States have an incredibly strong, vibrant economic, political, and cultural tie, and it'll never be broken. And I think Puerto Rico will be one of those, could be one of those.
IT in Puerto Rico belongs to Mexico. The airport that is federal and is not supposed to be sold belongs to Mexico.
All right. So
So maybe we got an option. We can be Mexican.
She mentioned the IT sector is controlled by Mexican interests as well as the being managed, the airport being leased. So my point being, I think that the vision should be cast that Puerto Rico would do as well as any of the other success stories in Latin America if it were allowed to develop. And it already has such a strong bond culturally with the United States. The University of Puerto Rico system is great. It's the crown jewel of Puerto Rico relative to all the other sectors, but they want to privatize that as well. And it's a really good educational institution if you can get to the university system. I didn't talk about crime and social distress and disorganization, but there are some real challenges that are going to have to be dealt with. Great points.
I have a quick question. Those statistics you presented about education were really impressive. And I was wondering, is that the public education system of Puerto Rico, or because a lot of the middle class and high middle class in Puerto Rico have their children in private schools, and they get a good education. So I was wondering if those children are included in that statistic or not. Do you know?
I do not know if the NAEP invites private schools. It may invite a sample of all students, but I don't know. That'd be a great thing to point out, that there are multiple populations in Puerto Rico. Right. But again, it makes the case that for the majority of Puerto Ricans who don't have access to these institutions, private institutions, this is what's happening to the next generation. And unless you have some sort of strange view, those children can be as successful as any children with the right resources and the right starting points. So, and they do much better if they come to the United States. So obviously, it has nothing to do with anything other than the institutional problems, the resources. Great questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I took notes on that, on the education statistics as well. And one of the things
that have worried people in Puerto Rico is when people start talking about going back to the land and producing from the land and fishing and all that, because there's a lot of educated Puerto Ricans as well, hence all of us that are here, and everyone who's migrated in the last 10 years. And I think I worked with economic development in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of people that are really well prepared to go beyond. We are looking into going into the sciences. The University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, for example, exports a lot of engineers, a lot of scientists. Of course, I do have friends that are working the land and are creating businesses within producing in a tropical island, producing the fruits that you can produce over there. But that's hopefully not the only thing in our future, since there's a lot of so many well-prepared, well-educated Puerto Ricans that are hopefully not represented in that 0%. I'm sorry? Exactly. Everything together, just knowing that in our future is not just going to the land and going to the ocean. We have other opportunities as well.
It was about 5, today there's not a single one. That employed a lot of people. Now even the rum companies have to import molasses to make rum in Puerto Rico. Can you believe that? The rum companies in Puerto Rico have to import molasses because the islands are not producing enough molasses to make rum.
So I think we're in an interesting time where this is the first time Puerto Rico these issues have come to light. First time ACC has had a discussion in Puerto Rico, maybe, I don't know. It's on the national news. For all of you here who hopefully you know more than 90% of most people in this country now, and you can go and spread the message and have discussions of your own with your own families and friends and networks, and hopefully get involved and say, we can write to our Congress people, we can write to our senators and say, take action. Let's make this a priority for U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens. I want to keep stressing that. 3.5 million U.S. citizens should not be allowed to live this way as they have been and stunt their development and stunt their potential. So Hopefully this helps you understand. I'd say the same thing about colonias in South Texas. I grew up in the border, and I could have a discussion about, Brownsville and the colonias where I grew up. So there are people in this country, we could talk about inner cities. There are pockets of populations. This happens to be a large one. And it's been sitting there for 116 years. And now I think it's time to have more serious discussions than ever before. Awesome. And more time. There's a question in the back? Yeah. Oh. Question here? Is this? Let's see if this one works.
So what do you think would be the reaction of the American public if Puerto Rico decided in the referendum that they wanted to become a state? Like, what do you think would happen? Because I've talked with a lot of Americans about that, and a lot of them say, well, why should we allow them to become a state? What's in it? What's in it for us? And to me, that's like a little bit offensive, because it's like, well, we're citizens. I mean, we've been citizens for over 100 years. It's more of like a moral question, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's a great question. I wish I'd looked at some data on opinions, political opinions about Puerto Rico among the general population. I don't know. I mean, you have your anecdotes, I have my anecdotes, many of us here. But I think you may have hit on one of the issues is probably just undereducation about this issue, ignorance. And I say ignorance is just lack of information. Just lack of information. I've talked to people, U.S. citizens since 1917. How many generations still don't know that citizens by birth? And so I think once the discussion increases and more understanding of who Puerto Ricans are, what they've contributed, more exposure to, it's not just salsa music, which is great, of course. It's the best music ever made, in my opinion. And reggaeton is not the best music ever made, but I'm getting older, I'm getting conservative, I see my problem. More exposure to that outside of sports and a Supreme Court justice and this, but real education. I think the United States, I think American people would like to understand more, and when they do understand more, I think they'll be more open to say, this makes sense. This makes a lot of sense for our country, for our history together.
But it could also make sense to say, let's support a country. Mm-hmm. It could also make sense to say, let's support a group of people, a country of people that could have dual citizenship, as other countries do allow for the U.S. and dual citizenship, and would allow for the national development, because one of the last things that Puerto Ricans are going to let go in their cultural pride is the Olympic participation as an independent country and in the international contest for Miss Universe.
Very true.
That'll be the last thing. No, that's going to be, and in fact, in one of the referendums some years ago, when the opinion was that, this time the Puerto Rican statehood group is going to win, someone came out with a TV spot that showed what was called the sweaty T-shirt that had a medal. And then a hand would come in from off screen, pull the medal off and say, with statehood no more. That was a turning point in public opinion to vote against statehood because of that. Yes, we want the dollars. Yes, we want the citizenship. Yes, we want the access. But yes, we also want our own culture, our own sports team, our own pride. When Puerto Rico won, look, it's a holiday when they beat the United States in international sports. So that national pride is going to be very difficult to get rid of. But let me go to something else in terms of why there is this opinion about this lack of knowledge. The image of Puerto Ricans in U.S. media, which is what I've studied and taught about for 30 years, is so low that I'm going to go back to some decades ago. There was a survey of 1,300 people or 1,500 people asking them their opinion of people from different ethnic groups. And they ranked the Anglos and the Europeans, and they were the higher. And they kept going down the line. And this group called Wesians, anybody heard of the Wesians? They don't exist. But there was a higher opinion of Wesians than there were of Mexicans, and the next to the last group was Puerto Ricans, followed by Gypsies. So in the media representation of who and what we are, it doesn't help no matter what status we would like to stay or move to. So a public campaign about who and what we are would be great, but the ultimate decision is going to be by corporations and Congress thinking what's best for them, not necessarily for the Puerto Rican people, until the Puerto Rican people, this is the wish dream list, get together and say, this is what we want as a country, and work for it together. And I don't see that happening in the near future. I'd like it to happen, but I don't see that's going to happen in the near future.
No, interesting. PR problem, pun intended.
We will be wind sail.
Because on the one hand, we see, I mean, there obviously, we cannot, how can I say this? So those images that were shown are real, and there's poverty. But I wonder what our Facebook looks like. And it's not like that. So it depends, and when I said it's a PR problem, it depends on what you want to show. Do you want to show Puerto Ricans as very different from the mainland and from the people who make decisions in Washington, D.C.? Or do you want to show Puerto Ricans as a little more similar to the culture here? And we can find pictures for both. And we can find stories for both, and we can find biographies for both sides, and interview both sides. So, and I wonder, should we show how poor Puerto Ricans are right now, or should we show, hey, everyone who's working and people who are not poor? My friend just organized something that was criticized by some, but it was very successful, the Dinner en Blanc. And it's a whole bunch of people sitting dressed in white and having dinner with pop-up tables at a balneario in Carolina. So, and there were thousands of people there, and it was very successful. So if you see a picture of that, you'll be like, oh, okay, that's, not the Puerto Rican kid. So it depends on what we want to show. And it depends on what we want, right, out of what we're showing.
Point. See, discussion.
Okay, yeah.
You need to do another in cultural shocks.
Okay, I have a question, not about Puerto Rico directly, but rather about you. I imagine you teach here. What classes, I'm just curious, what classes do you teach here, and how you came? Is one a class or two about Puerto Rico?
I teach sociology classes. Yeah. And so if it comes up in, we talk about different demographic groups in the United States, we'll talk about Puerto Rico, but no, I don't have a specific Puerto Rican focus per se. If I do, I tend to use more Mexican Americans as case studies, obviously being in Texas. But I was interested as I got more involved and spoke to my family in New York, and all my family's gone. They've all left the island. And so I don't have a very strong connection to the island anymore. But I was worried, concerned, as the more I looked at it, the more I'd read these books a long time ago, but a lot has changed since the 1990s when I kept up with it. So in that sense, I decided, well, I asked, may I present this information and hopefully help some people think more critically about this issue. And I've learned more here than I have in a long time about these issues. So I'm glad I got to listen. Other questions or comments?
And we're glad you got the forum together because, as you said, this is what's needed, right? That people are informed and that we get to talk in a university, in a public forum, and it gets us together, and we'll hopefully meet afterwards and meet other people who are interested in the topic.
Yeah.
So we appreciate
thank you.
everything you presented.
Wow.
Thank you.
So one one more positive comment. My father is from a little town in the north, a little bit past Arecibo, called Atillo. And a couple of years ago, I found out that there was a chemistry major, a woman who had a company that was, she used to test, it's a dairy town, so she used to test the milk for the dairy farmers. And then there was a problem with low production of milk, so she was losing money. And she decided she was going to make cheese, the Vaca Negra. And she makes artisanal cheese that is incredible, is highly rated. So we can have an agricultural system that actually supports people with degrees of all kinds. I also recently met a professor from the University of Alabama when he found out he was from Puerto Rico. He's an adjunct professor at Mayagüez, recruits Puerto Rican engineers to come do the masters and doctorals in Alabama, University of Alabama. Of course, then they stay here, they don't go back, like I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, there is a future, you know. We just need to build it, yes.
I'd say the biggest challenge, which I didn't include, of course, you can't talk about Puerto Rico without talking about Puerto Ricans who are here. And that's another dimension to this as to how they feel or don't. And this question will have to involve them as well, as, you know, as is possible and as is able, because there is this strange connection. You know, I think of all my family, they don't think very highly of Puerto Rico as a system anymore. They love their island, but they're all New Yorkers. They're completely now embedded in New York and Connecticut and Jersey, and they've made their life there. And so Puerto Rico is something different to them now than those who still live on the island. I've noticed that. And the men, they're Americans. Yeah, you know, my uncle still is a Marine. He's 80-something years old. He's still a Marine. And that phenomenon is not limited. It's Samoans, it's Mexican Americans, it's this very high pride about being an American as well. So it's connected. Puerto Rico will always be, Puerto Ricans, because of 117 years now, they're going to see themselves as extremely embedded in this society. So for me, I find it hard to imagine an independent Puerto Rico. I find it very difficult. But that's because I've never been in Puerto Rico more than summers and summers and summers. You know, I spend more time in New York.
I doubt very much that Puerto Rico will ever be independent, because the deepest part of the ocean is in Puerto Rico, and the United States needs it for war.
Yeah, there's a strategic position of Puerto Rico. It's always, since 1895, Puerto Rico has been thought we need to always keep track of Puerto Rico, because they are protection in the Caribbean ever since Cuba became independent, especially. So you see, even here among Puerto Ricans, again, I don't see, and I don't really want an independent Puerto Rico. It may be the best thing, you do. And so, like I said, my grandfather, he hated flying the American flag, but he went to war for America. And I find that very hard to understand, you know, as a native born. So I said, okay. We'll see. So for those of you who want to play a game, keep track. What happens on May 31st? Also, if the Department of Justice will give, the Attorney General will give funds to hold this referendum in June 12th, right? Because there's this drama unfolding about this next vote. And so now you got something to keep track of, right? So get it on Facebook and so forth and so on.
I wanted to add something. I have a friend, and he's very involved in.
My friend's argument, who's very involved in the pro-independence movement, says that debt is not ours because it is the price to maintain a colony, so that's the U.S. debt. That is you all's.
Yeah. And it would be a violation of international law if Puerto Rico became a country to let it start out in debt. But that's exactly what happened to all Latin American countries after independence movements, which is why they started with a back in the back of the pack. And so, and that was illegal by international law. When a colony becomes a country, you cannot saddle it with debt at its beginning. Treaties were signed on that issue. So there's a possibility there. But thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.